I think your next film is you went to Italy and did Francis of Assisi with Michael Curtiz and Brad Dillman.
Right.
And then you really had a memorable part in the Comancheros opposite Duke Wayne. Can you tell us how you got the part of Paul Regret in the Comancheros?
In the Comancheros.
Comancheros, sorry.
We were shooting in Rome, and Michael Curtiz said, my next film is this, called The Comancheros.
Mm-hmm.
Take it home and read it. Not home, take it to your room and read it. And tell me what you think of it. And I thought, well, that's a big honor. We had about 3 days left to do this film that we were doing, St. Francis of Assisi. And he said, do you see anything in it that you could do? And I said, absolutely. Paul Regret. And they said, that's what I thought. It might be cast. I believe it is cast. But when you get back to Hollywood, stop in at the casting office and
Sure.
check it out. So I did, and they said, no, it's been assigned. I called up Michael Curtiz and said, it's been cast. He says, well, maybe it has, maybe it hasn't. So he said, why don't you go over and talk to John Wayne, the Duke? And I said, where do I find him? And he said, at Paramount. He's shooting a film there. And so I went over, I worked my way into Paramount Studios. And he was just going into his trailer. And I was right behind him. He didn't know that. And as he got his trailer, he started to close the door. And he said, what the are you doing here?
You were following behind him.
What do you want? I was following him, see. And I said, I want Paul Regret. I want that role. He said, you do? What makes you think you can play it? And so I go, ba 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 ba. And he says, okay, you got the job. Just like that.
That was the power of the Duke, I guess.
That's right.
Yeah. And what was Duke like to work with, the larger than life John Wayne? What was any recollections of that?
Yes, I do have one. We were setting up. We were in Moab, Utah.
There you go.
And he said he could see I had a bag with me, and he says, where you going? And I said, on the river. There's a hot boat race going on, I heard, and I'm going to go up and check it out. And he said, well, I'd like to do that too. And I said, well, come on. He said, no. He said, let's take my car. I said, well, mine's all packed. And he says, let's take my car, and then I'll go. And I said, okay. We were there on the riverbanks. It wasn't 11 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And no one was there but us.
Mm-hmm.
11 minutes later, the crowd just came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
People came out of nowhere that John Wayne was there.
Like having the Beatles or Elvis there.
Yeah, more so than that.
Yeah.
And he said, there you are. I'll send the car back for you. Now you know why I wanted to bring my car.
Yeah. So he couldn't. I think one of the things about the Comancheros that's pretty interesting is, John Wayne was really a student of film, and at the time that was done, that was Michael Curtiz's last film, although he certainly didn't know it. And Curtiz was so ill that John Wayne, in effect, really directed most of the film, and finished the film, did most of the film, and so forth. And one of the sad stories about Curtiz, who lived to direct films, is he had made a film in 1956 called The Proud Rebel for Sammy Goldwyn Jr., and he had an appendicitis. So they put him in the hospital, and when they operated on him, they found that he had cancer, and it was advanced. And his wife and his doctor made a decision not to tell him. I mean, in this day and age, that's pretty extraordinary. But that was the decision they made. So fast forward now, this is what, 6, 7 years later, and he's made 5 or 6 movies later, and he's walking around in Moab with Stu and Duke Wayne and all these folks making this movie, and he stumbles and falls, and he hurt his leg, and they x-rayed his leg, and it was like lattice work from the cancer. And so he went back to his doctor, and he found out that his doctor and his wife did not tell him, and he said, "Why you don't tell me? Why don't you tell me?" And they said, "Well, how many movies have you made since then?" And he said, "Yes, you're right, it's better not to know." And that was his last movie, and he passed on shortly after that. But you also did another film with Duke Wayne, The Longest Day, in Europe, and that was, you know, the mother of all-star casts and so forth. Is there any particular memories of The Longest Day that you can remember?
A friend of mine, we were in Paris, a friend of mine, he just opened up a bar, and it was going to be the opening day of the bar and everything. He said, "You want to go to the party? You're invited, and if you like, bring some of your pals with you."
Mm-hmm.
So I did. John Wayne, one of them, and
Bob Ryan?
And Ryan.
Yeah.
Bob Ryan's my neighbor in North Hollywood, sweetheart of a guy. He was a real Democrat.
Yeah, he's a very liberal guy. Very liberal guy.
Very liberal guy. And as soon as the Duke saw him, he had no idea.
The Duke was not a very liberal guy.
And they got into it right away. And I broke up the fight, and then a couple of my other pals that were there, we broke up the fight. And I said to Ryan, "Ryan, why did you start this with the Duke?" And he said, "That SOB, he and all those conservative guys, they bombed my front door of my house. Now, I got 2 kids, which he did, and a wife. And I said, anybody get hurt? No, thank God it didn't, but it was pretty, yeah, that's a story to tell, yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting story, if I can piggyback on it, because it has something to do with our previous guest, Marcia Hunt. At that time, Marcia and Bob Ryan, very, very like politically, they went on the radio and they read the manifesto of the John Birch Society. That was what happened. And so what happened is Marcia's house, they found a bomb in front of her house, and then there was a bomb that was at Bob Ryan's house, and so forth. And so as I heard the story, Bob Ryan, shortly after this incident that Stu related, he went back home to make sure that his family was safe and so forth. And Lisa Ryan, Bob's daughter, who's a friend of mine, told me that her recollection, and she was 62, she was probably 11, 12 years old, she remembers Duke Wayne coming back, the shoot was over, they came back, Bob came back ahead, and Duke Wayne showed up at the Ryan front yard with a rifle in his hand to talk to reporters and said, "I don't give a shit about his politics, but no one's going to push my friend Bob Ryan around." Yeah, that is a true story. That is a true story.
I'll be there.
Yeah.
Well,
now, you still live up in, am I going to mispronounce it, Mendocino?
Montecito.
Montecito, yeah.
Santa Barbara.
Santa Barbara, yeah. And a lot of times your neighbors were a lot of very famous people from the film industry that everyone in our audience is familiar with. For example, Jane Russell, you told me, was like a sister to you, and Whitmark, but also there was the one and only Robert Mitchum.
Across the street.
Across the street, it was across the street. I remember at one point in Bob's life, and I guess this isn't funny, but I guess it's funny because it's Mitchum, when his drinking problem did get acute, his family staged an intervention and his friends, and Bob went to Betty Ford. And then when he got back, I think you asked him how that worked for him. Do you remember that story?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, Mike.
Yes, that's right. I said, well, what did you learn there at Betty Ford? so he says, more ice.
Yeah. I mean, that was vintage Mitchum. Do you have any other particular Mitchum recollection that you can share with us?
About Mitchum?
Yeah, about Mitchum. Sure.
We were up in the mountain. He came along for the ride. And we were shooting. We were skeet shooting up there. And we had well, it's fun to do that. At any rate, I says, Mitch, come on up and shoot. And he said, no, I don't want to. And I said, come on, man. All he was doing was sitting there. And I said, you need some exercise. He says, hey, I get enough exercise. I breathe in and I breathe out.
Well, Stu, it has been great. I mean, having you here.
If you had a drink for me, I could go on.
Oh, okay. Hey, here you go. Any rate, put it together for the one and only Stuart Whitman. Stu, thank you so much.